The afternoon sun beat down on the busy street, and the little food truck hummed with life. The grill sizzled, sending up curls of smoky steam mixed with the tang of roasted peppers and spiced meat. She worked quickly, her apron stained from hours of cooking, hair tied back in a messy bun that refused to stay neat no matter how many times she fixed it. With practiced hands, she flipped tortillas, filled orders, and shouted out numbers, her smile faint but polite for every customer. The line stretched down the sidewalk, construction workers in dusty boots, students balancing backpacks, office clerks scrolling on their phones as they waited. She didn't let herself rest, didn't even glance up for more than a second at each face. To her, they were all the same, hungry people looking for a cheap, filling meal. Near the end of the line stood a man who didn't belong. His suit was perfectly cut, his shoes polished, his wristwatch catching the sun in a flash of silver. He looked out of place among the casual crowd, but he didn't complain, didn't ask for attention. Instead, he waited patiently, his eyes fixed on her, not with the indifference of a stranger, but with the quiet intensity of someone who carried a secret. She didn't notice. She was too busy stacking paper trays, wiping her hands on her apron, and keeping her mind on the orders. To her, he was just another customer. To him, she was someone he had been waiting a very long time to see again. When his turn finally came, she barely slowed her rhythm. Her hand reached automatically for a tray as she asked, "What'll it be?" Her tone was brisk, not rude, just efficient, the way someone working long hours had learned to conserve energy. Her eyes didn't linger on him, just a quick glance before she turned back to the sizzling grill. He stood there a moment, taking her in the familiar curve of her cheek, the small frown line she made when concentrating. It had been years, yet to him she hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. He wanted to speak, to say her name, but his throat tightened. She was looking at him as if he were a stranger. "I'll take the carne asada plate," he said finally, his voice calm though his chest thudded with anticipation. She nodded, scribbled the order on a slip, and passed it along without even realizing the weight behind his words. The line behind him shifted impatiently, but he didn't move. He watched as she worked, quick and skilled, her hands flying from one task to the next. She never once looked at him again. He wondered if the years had erased him from her memory, or if life had simply buried those days so deeply that even his face no longer mattered. To her, he was just another man in an expensive suit who could afford to eat anywhere, yet ended up at her food truck. To him, every second of her indifference cut deeper, proof of how far apart their worlds had grown. She slid the plate across the counter, barely glancing up as she called the next number for the waiting crowd. The smell of grilled meat and spices filled the air, drowning in the chatter of customers, the hiss of the grill, the honking traffic nearby. To her, this was routine: serve, smile, move on. He didn't move. Instead of taking the food and stepping aside, he lingered at the counter. For a heartbeat, she thought he was one of those indecisive customers who always asked for extra sauce after the order was finished. Without lifting her gaze, she reached for a stack of napkins. That's when he leaned just slightly forward, closing the space between them. His cologne was faint, expensive, but underneath it she caught something achingly familiar, like the faint scent of soap she used to know, years ago. His voice dropped low, soft enough that only she could hear over the noise. "Still remember me?" The napkins slipped from her hand, scattering across the counter. The words struck her harder than any shout, and for the first time she truly looked at him. Her eyes locked with his, and in an instant the careful mask of indifference she wore every day cracked. Her breath caught. Something in his gaze, earnest, vulnerable, almost pleading, pulled at a memory she hadn't allowed herself to revisit in years. The man in the sharp suit wasn't just another customer. He was someone who knew her before the apron, before the food truck, before the hard years that had carved her into who she was now. And suddenly, the bustling street around them faded. Lou. Her chest tightened as his face shifted in her memory, peeling back the years until she saw him not as the polished man in front of her but as the boy she used to know. The boy with unruly hair and worn-out sneakers, who always carried laughter in his eyes even when his stomach growled from hunger. She remembered the corner of the street where they used to sit, sharing a single sandwich because neither of them could afford more. He would always give her the bigger half, brushing it off with a grin that said he didn't mind. Images flooded her, evenings spent sprawled on cracked pavement, pointing at the sky and making promises they were too young to keep. Dreams of escape, of building a life where they wouldn't have to count coins for bus fare or scrounge for food. She remembered how he swore that one day, he'd make something of himself, not for his sake, but for hers. And then came the day he disappeared. One moment he was her best friend, her secret safe place in a world that was too harsh for two kids alone. The next, he was gone, swallowed by opportunities she couldn't touch, leaving behind an ache she buried under work, survival, and the daily grind of trying not to fall apart. Now here he was, standing in front of her, proof that his promises weren't empty. The expensive suit, the confidence in his posture, the watch gleaming on his wrist, they all screamed of success. But his eyes were the same. The same boy she once trusted with her whole heart. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wanted to ask where he'd been, why he never came back, why he had left her to face the world alone. But the questions tangled on her tongue, stuck between anger, disbelief, and a hope she didn't want to admit still lived inside her.